So I had an honor to write a foreword for your book, which is the first time translated in Lithuania. And I think this book is hugely needed for us to understand what we can do. And you were talking today also about changing the mindset and how to do it when you are born in Soviet Union and you are born in socialistic apartment and you are, going by bus every day in these white streets and you are going to a socialistic built school where are no common spaces, only dark corridors. And then you are going to the shop, which is also socialist built, without any public spaces around. And then you are going back in this wide street without lighting, without greenery, like 8 lanes for the cars. And in this dark, you are going home to your socialist apartment. And what do you think? Because I remember myself in my childhood, and this is how I start this foreword in your book, then I'm standing near the, traffic light. So I'm standing near traffic light after my school with a big back rack. And I'm standing very, very long, in this context. And it's raining, and it's wet, and it's red for pedestrians, so I'm waiting, and these cars are just passing and passing and passing. And I'm thinking, what the city thinks when these people in these warm cars are going home, and these children are waiting for 10 minutes near the red traffic light. What city thinks? This was my question when I was 12. And when I found out your book after 20 years, I was amazed that you are talking about. But since then, I am looking for that answers, how to make the city think about humans. And you are talking a lot about it, but how, maybe just one more time, just in this context, when we are, how to change this mindset practically.
I mentioned that my life has been very much divided in 2 parts. First, the part where I studied how people were faring in cities and how they could be better. And then a period where I was trying to apply this in real life. And I've had the fantastic opportunity to be asked by London and New York and Melbourne and Sydney and Singapore, a lot of cities to apply more or less some of these ideas, or all of them. Some have been very successful. So I've seen cities change completely. I've seen places changing dramatically, like Times Square, New York, and I've seen cities like the most dramatic change have been in Western Australia, in Perth, which was awful. Now it's nice. And also, so I've seen changes, and when you mention this about the socialistic, actually you're talking about modernism, a very rough type of modernism, which in some countries it was dynamited away. In other countries they have rebuilt it. Now in my country they rebuild them very drastically. They take down 1/3 of the blocks and build small, low stuff in between to have a small scale and to have a more other mix of people and to have other functions than housing. So there is a complete industry, I would say, of how to transform modernistic, because there's a lot of investment in these buildings, and we cannot just dynamite them. And we cannot, with the climate issues we have, we cannot just say, let's get rid of them and build something new, because building is also something which is very damaging for the climate. So we'll have to transform them, and there are many examples, but it's a big job in some of the countries. Maybe in your country, I haven't really seen it here. I've seen it in many other socialistic countries.
They're pretty much the same.
Yeah, I would know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. When I was writing this forward, I was also doing the research on you and on your work, of course, you done. And it was such a deja vu feeling also when you are writing about this main street of Copenhagen, how it's called? Strømmen, yes,
Yeah.
Strømmen. It was 60 years ago when you came back from Italy with your wife, where you have been doing your research about the livable cities. And you came back, and the main change was being done in Copenhagen when this main street it was transformed from like a transport street to pedestrian street. And still it was a big disturbance in the city, almost assassination of mayor or something like this.
Almost like what?
Assassination of mayor. I was reading somewhere in the papers.
Oh yeah, there were. But I should say that I have absolutely nothing to do with taking the traffic out of the main street in Copenhagen. That was when I was a very young architect. I was restoring medieval churches at that time. And that was, I'd just been married and I had hardly heard the criticism from the psychologist at that point. But it is, there was a very strong debate in Denmark. When the main street was changed was because they wanted to give better conditions for the customers so they can buy more in the shops. And that was a conservative, right-wing mayor who said, let's take the cars out so that the shoppers have better possibilities to do shopping. And that was nothing about making better for people, it was about making better for shopping. But we had this great discussion in Denmark about quality. Couldn't we make housing areas better? Couldn't we make, what was the influence of the car invasion and how did that influence life of people? And we talked much about environment, urban environment, urban milieu, we called it. And then my wife and I, when we had discussed sufficiently, we said, let's go to Italy and see, because maybe in Italy they have milieu, they have good environment. And that was very important because suddenly we saw public spaces in a completely other function where people were talking to each other and that a lot of things were going on in the public spaces. That was all the things we could see in the old pictures in Denmark, but not in the present day modernism and motorism. And when we had this first pedestrian street, we saw a fantastic change in behavior. And that was maybe, I started to study there when I was in university, beginning university. And we saw that suddenly people slowed down and they brought their children and the old people popped up and they talked much more and they sat on benches and looked at each other. It was a completely different behavior from the shopping activity or the noisy activity in a traffic street. And by documenting these differences actually was the beginning of making many more car-free streets or car-free areas because we could prove that there was a fantastic gain in the things people could do if they don't have to watch for the cars all the time. And that is one of the central things, that there's a number of things you can do to chase people away. One is to make high noise and to make it dangerous with traffic, or make too little space, or there are many things you can do. But there are also good things you can do to invite them. And I'm very proud in this book. I will show you. Because this book, I was asked by the foundation to put everything I've ever found out in one book. And very deliberately in the end, we have a chapter here called, you can say the word, here we are.
It's a toolbox. You mean this one?
Yeah, the toolbox.
Įrankių dėžė, toolbox.
And in this chapter, I put every list of good advice I ever made in my 50 years of research. So they're all here. So if you want to see what I have found out, you can go to the toolbox. And many of the things I showed also in the lecture is here. And tomorrow I will tell about, yeah, that's one of my favorites. 15 things the traffic engineers have found out to make life worse for people in cities.
Jan is talking tomorrow to temas, is our government room, so I think it's very, very important that you will make these, toolboxes also for the government and for the authorities, because as you said in the beginning in your lecture, that we are very universal. And as the same problem in Copenhagen was 60 years ago, when there was a lot of disturbance for citizens who wanted to go with the cars in the main streets. So there are the same, discussion in Vilnius.
Yeah, of course.
60
but
years
ago. I tell you some
Yes.
funny things. I worked maybe in 300 cities, and every single of them, they start by saying, you must realize that our city is different. Our people have a higher connection to their cars, and it's more important for us with cars. And then we do a better city for people, and nobody can remember who said this.
Exactly.
Especially in New York. When we started to work in New York, they said these European ideas won't work in America. And you realize this is a big apple. We are awake 24 hours a day. It's a completely different cup of tea. And then we closed most part of Times Square, and they behaved exactly like in Italy. They could not do it before the cars were out.
Exactly. This is such a good evidence that we are universal, and the universal principle as humanistic city is the way for good urban environment and for good city living. One question also for you from our Vilnius experience and Lithuanian experience. Here is Mindaugas, he is the president of Lithuanian Association for Developers. And we have together like this academy for developers, which one course is for architecture and for urban design. And we did such experiments there, because now it's the 5th time, I think, and we are teaching architecture, of course, there. And I always, or a few times, did this experiment. I asked for the students who are actual developers, so they actually build things, to send one picture of environment from the city, which they feel good, which they would like, to repeat, which was like really nice and cozy. And they sent. And then the end of all the workshop, which ends all day, I ask why you not build these kind of spaces, because we make collages for all the students of developers, and there are mostly actually Italy, Portugal, very nice squares with cafes, corner cafes, or something like this.
5 kilometers an hour.
Yes, it is 5 kilometers per hour. And I think the students who are the developers are really astonished that the way they like and the way they build. So it's
That's interesting.
It's a very, very big amplitude. And they are, wow, but we can actually build the way we like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is also changing the maybe attitudes and responsibilities, because when I was listening to you today, I was also thinking when you were talking about the streets, and that we remember the streets and the feeling of the streets, but not authentic building designs. I was thinking the streets are common goods and buildings are individual benefit. This is also for the developers also. And when we are thinking only about individual benefits, then we're not thinking about this neighborhood goods, and then we forget the feeling we actually admire the most. So it's
That was a very interesting story. Of course, it could be summed up in this: never think about what your city can do for your building. Always think what your building can do for the city.
So beautiful, yes.
I think I stole that quote from someone.
We also always feel
But
inspired.
it is, you can do so much with the building design to make a wonderful area. I have had a very interesting client in Norway, a big building corporation, and they was so concerned about the neighborhood quality, and they said, we are building this new district and we don't want to have income from the shops in the bottom, because we want it to be really good streets, because if we have really attractive streets, it will be a much better investment for us. And we can always pick up the money in the next floor and the next floor over behind. So that they said, how wide should the shops be, and should there be flower? Yeah, flowers. And should there be art? Yes. And should there be little kiosks and small units and bigger units? But no Mercedes-Benz and Hennes and Mauritz and long, big stories, because we found, which is also in this book, that there's so much difference between a lively street and a dull street. And if you have some lively shop in the street, there will be 7 times more activity in front of that shop than in front of the bank further down. And the funny thing is that the 7 times more activity in front of the active shop has nothing to do, only half of it has to do with the shop, people sort of seeing what's in the shop. All the other ones, they're talking in the phone or organizing their shoelaces. So if you have anything to organize, you go to a place where there are other people and do it there. And that was very interesting. So it is really important to have as lively and interesting streets and street surfaces as possible. And of course, that is much discussed now, because internet trade takes over and many small shops are having a bad time, and many small provincial cities are dying. So that is much discussed, and that's a discussion we cannot take here because it will take until,
Yes.
and we also have time for signing
Okay, so the last question before signing until the midnight. Here are a lot of people who want this livable city, who wants little Vilnius, who wants to enjoy city life and these beautiful edges you are speaking about. And they will definitely read your book, they will have it and get inspirations from it. What, for example, free advices you could advise for us as individuals, what we can do personally, individually, that our city in which we are living in would become a little bit better from our small, could be very small, but individual, maybe habit, maybe attitude, maybe some kind of, action. What free advices, little ones, could we bring and learn from you?
One thing which I think is very, very useful, that is to go to, if you are building city districts or housing areas, then make post-occupancy evaluation. Then go there after it's finished and see how it works. Sit there for several days and make notes, so that you learn from what you're doing, because so much of what we are doing as architects and planners, they are just experiments which are never understood and never followed up by research of did that experiment work. When we do a new project, we have all kinds of fine ideas and we do it, and then we rush to the next project and nobody comes back to see if it worked. It's so important that we learn from what we are doing. That was one thing. The other thing is I can strongly recommend you to watch people sit somewhere. Could be in a square in Italy, or it could be here in Lithuania in the summer preferably, and just sit there for half a day and see how the flows of life and if you sit there 3 days in a row, you will find that there's a very same rhythm every day and the same things are happening, and there is a breathing of a city or district. It's not, in the beginning I thought that every day would be completely different because people could not recognize what people would do, they'll do this, that. But then I found that it's so regular that the city is like a machine. People they're going to work and they're going to shopping, they're going to there. And if it's in September and it's a good day, I know exactly what's happening in Copenhagen. Because it is like last September. And then if you do it 10 years later, you can see it's not exactly like 10 years ago. And then you can see there's been some changes, which is important that when we recognize these changes and react to them. And I mentioned that every city had a department which counts all the traffic every day, all year. And I can strongly recommend that you also have some people responsible in the city to follow the life of the city and to document regularly what's going on. Many cities do that now because we found what you count, you care for. And all the years you didn't count people, you didn't care enough. You cared for the cars. And now we see in Sydney, in Melbourne, in New York and other places that by systematizing, getting feedback from what you do in the city, it could be made much better. Also, if you change the street, find out what happened and whether you could do it better next time or whatever, so that you know more all the time instead of just guessing. There's been among architects much guessing and much postulating. This is a fantastic way of doing it. Do it. And then I run away and you live with this.
So 3 tips, and most of them are about observation. observing what's working, observing and inspiring from what already is. So I think we will do it, and this is a very good tip for bringing our cities up for more inspirations. And now I think everybody is waiting for you for signature your book. So thank you very much for your conversation.
You're most welcome.